Hi everyone, welcome back. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Right, so just the strains of Sibelius' violin concerto there, which features in the Franzen essay, if you remember that, if you've read it. Doesn't matter if you haven't, but he goes with his father to listen to it, and he says, you know, do they remember it all? And it always struck me that someone playing a concerto from memory is one of the most extraordinary feats and demonstrations of the human mind. The fact that something so complicated could be committed to memory, but not just that, but it could be committed to a degree where it becomes effortless and, in a sense, unconscious, which is one of the most amazing things. And if anyone's learnt an instrument, you'll know that process, where you can almost feel the neurons forming and firing as you try to work your way through a new piece. So, if you were a younger audience, if you're undergraduates, got one there. I would probably at this point issue a trigger warning, because some of the material here is quite affecting, it's quite emotional, and I'm sure, particularly for those of us who might have had personal contact with questions of dementia and Alzheimer's. And if I approach it in a way that seems not always that serious, it's not because I don't believe it's a serious subject matter, but because, as I think we'll see, the question opens up onto such a range of human experiences. It's such a radical opening up of the self in all its forms, and there's so many emotions, and they're often strangely inappropriate. Comedy, absurdity, along with the more negative ones. So, yeah, I just thought I'd say that. But since you're not undergraduates, I won't push you through. You're a tougher generation, so I won't need to do that. So I thought, just by way of epigraph, I would read this passage from Emerson's lectures on memory. He gave this lecture. Memory is the primary and fundamental faculty, without which none other can work. The cement, the bitumen, the matrix in which the other faculties are embedded. Or it is the thread on which the beads of man are strung, making the personal identity which is necessary to moral action. Without it, all life and thought were an unrelated succession. As gravity holds matter from flying off into space, so memory gives stability to knowledge. It is the cohesion which keeps things from falling into a lump or flowing in waves. And it was interesting to me to read this great metaphor of bitumen and cement. When I taught Rustam Coetzee essay Dacha, he pointed out to me something I didn't know, that Dacha, to me it means marijuana, but it also has another meaning in Cape Town. It means grout and cement that's used by construction workers, Daga. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that word, I hadn't heard that, but he said he was thinking of that when he wrote his essay about Dacha, which is of course the drug of amnesia, but Dacha also the matrix and the bitumen, the grouting of memory. Emerson goes on, memory performs the impossible for man by the strength of his divine arms, although often it's personified as a muse, Mnemosyne, well not the muse, the mother of the muses, in classical mythology. She's the mother of the nine muses, the goddess Mnemosyne, holds together past and present, beholding both, existing in both, abides in the flowing and gives continuity and dignity to human life. It holds us to our family, to our friends, hereby a home is possible, hereby only a new fact has value. Interesting that, in fact only has value with memory. I'll just carry on for one more paragraph. Memory is not a pocket, but a living instructor with a prophetic sense of the values which he guards. A guardian angel set there within you to record your life, and by recording to animate you, to uplift it. It is a scripture written day by day from the birth of the man. All its records full of meanings, which open as he lives on, explaining each other, explaining the world to him, and expanding their sense as he advances, until it shall become the whole law of nature and life. And I'm just interested to see this remarkable, capacious intellect, Emerson, as the metaphors he starts coining to try and understand memory are just so delicious. As every creature is furnished with teeth to seize and eat, and with a stomach to digest its food, so the memory is furnished with a perfect apparatus. There is no book like the memory, none with such a good index. And that of every kind, alphabetic, systematic, arranged by names of persons, by colours, tastes, smells, shapes, likeness, unlikeness, by all sorts of mysterious hooks and eyes to catch and hold, and contrivances for giving a hint. Wonderful muscular language. What I learned when reading this book, David Schenk's Forgetting, which to me is a far more dignified name than Alzheimer's disease. And interestingly, we were talking about biographies of non-human things yesterday, and the first edition was called Biography of a Disease, actually. And it put me in mind of other great writing at the interface of the humanities and medicine. So much great writing, Oliver Sacks. And Siddhartha Mukherjee's book on cancer, his biography of cancer, The Emperor of All Maladies, extraordinary book. David Schenk points out that Emerson himself must have suffered from dementia. He was plagued about 10 years after writing this lecture, he began forgetting things. And there's an extraordinary moving part in this book where he talks about Emerson, where as his memory was failing, he would go and deliver these lectures that he used to just deliver, totally extemporaneously, just off the cuff. Now he was reading them, not even understanding. So he gave a lecture on memory, read his own lecture on memory while his memory was failing, and not, so there was something very affecting about that. It's a wonderful book, and I think often regarded as one of the definitive sort of popular science books on Alzheimer's. We'll get to more of it. But what I want to do today is actually go through the Franzen essay quite closely, and as I go through, it'll spin off into other little ideas and intertexts. But let's see what Franzen does here. So Jonathan Franzen, known primarily as a novelist, of course, and in the corrections, I hope some of you might have read the corrections. It's a fantastic novel, very funny. There's also a meditation on. Well, in that case, it's not Alzheimer's, it's Parkinson's, which the father figure gets. Franzen is, I kind of like him because he's afraid to not be trendy. He's sort of railed against social media. He refused to go to Oprah's book club or something. I can't remember what the controversy was, but he got in trouble, for just not playing the game. And he's quite a fierce writer, and it's quite a fierce essay, and I must say, sometimes I have mixed feelings about the way he chooses to express himself, but I also salute his attempt to look things in the face and be very unflinching as he talks about his father's death. So he starts, here's a memory. On an overcast morning in February 1996, I received in the mail from my mother in St. Louis a Valentine's package containing one pinkly romantic greeting card, 2 4-ounce Mr. Good bars, 1 hollow red filigree heart on the loop thread, and 1 copy of a neuropathologist's report on my father's brain. So, in that paragraph, first of all, I will note that obviously there's the little pretty, like in music you get what's called the grace note, where before you play the note you get a little ping. So before you start, if you just started there, it would be a very traditional realist beginning. On an overcast morning, place, time. But he's already destabilizing his own memory in the essay. And that's why this becomes that sort of Mobius strip again. Because he's writing about memory, but he's also aware that he's relying on his own memory. And he's not always that sure about how reliable his own memory is. So the essay becomes a very complex, and I think it's a remarkable piece for how much is in it, how much research, how much thinking. Then we have this list, and the list is such a great device for writers. There's some writers who just if you're doing your own writing, just try and make lists sometimes. And this one starts with romantic greeting cards, and it's the good bars. Those are chocolate bars. I'll come back to those. And then the red heart, and then bam. It's sort of the graph of that sentence. It becomes very pathetic. The last thing undercuts it. What the hell is a brain autopsy doing in a Valentine's Day package? So he says, I remember the bright grey winter light that morning. I remember leaving the candy, the card, and the ornament in my living room, taking the autopsy report into my bedroom and sitting down to read. The brain it began, weighed 1.255 grams, so it might be some smaller grams, and showed parasagittal atrophy with sulcal widening. Medical discourse obviously intruding here. I remember translating grams into pounds and pounds into the familiar shrink-wrapped equivalents in the supermarket meat case. I remember putting the report back into its envelope without reading it further. So, it's quite a risky beginning. He reads about his father's brain, and he thinks about something you might find in a supermarket meat fridge, like a kidney or something, shrink-wrapped meat. So immediately we see what he's doing here. He's trying to see what it means to remember his father as both his father and to understand the shockingly material bodily nature of our existence, beginning with the brain. And we think about we're told to think about all kinds of things all the time, ISCOM, silver and polar, climate change, but we don't often think about the brain. And the brain, we should think about the brain more. This is a piece of art done by my nephew, Leo, and yeah, it's about that size. This is from Schenk. This is how he opens his book on Alzheimer's. A healthy, mature human brain is roughly the size and shape of 2 adult fists, closed and pressed together at the knuckles. Weighing 3 pounds, it consists mainly of about 100 billion nerve cells, neurons, linked to one another in about 100 trillion separate pathways. It is by far the most complicated system known to exist in natural civilization. Control center for the coordination of breathing, swallowing, pressure, pain, fear, arousal, sensory perception, muscular movement, abstract thought, identity, mood, and a varied suite of memories in a symphony that is partly predetermined and partly adaptable on the fly. The brain is so ridiculously complex, in fact, that considering it in any depth, one can only reasonably wonder why it works so well. Mostly we don't think about it at all. We simply take this nearly silent, ludicrously powerful electrochemical engine for granted. Lovely phrase. We feed it, try not to smash it too hard against walls or windshields, and let it work its magic for us. Only when it begins to fail in some way, only then are we surprised, devastated, and in awe. I must say, it's this question of awe that I'm quite interested in. How some of these materials that we'll go through, they subject the writer watching to a kind of awe at the human brain, which is glimpsed as it begins to fail. So you only notice something when it stops working. I think sometimes we notice the brain when we've written exams. I don't know if any of you, when the last time any of you wrote an exam, but I remember how hungry you get after exam, and he goes on to say how much glucose the brain, it takes enormous amounts of power from our body to power the brain. It's energy hungry. It's running so fast. So the reason this is back to the Franzen, the reason he's got this gory package is because his father had been part of the study of memory and aging, and one of the perks was it's a very ironic voice, but it's very sardonic almost. It says that one of the perks was a post-mortem brain autopsy free of charge. Great. I suspect that the study offered other perks of monitoring and treatment, which had led my mother, who loved freebies of all kinds, to insist that my father volunteer for it. Thrift was also probably her only conscious motive for including the autopsy report in my Valentine's package. She was saving 32 cents postage. He's going big here. His father's brain is a piece of meat, his mother's stingy. He's going all in. So it's quite a bravura opening, stakes quite high. Then he immediately pedals back and says, well, what have I just described for you? How reliable is it? He says, my clearest memory of that February morning are visual and spatial, the yellow Mr. Goodbar, my shift from living room to bedroom, the late morning light, etc. However, I'm aware that even these memories, aren't to be trusted. According to the latest theories, which are based on a wealth of neurological psychological research, the brain is not an album in which memories are stored discreetly. like unchanging photograph. It's interesting to me in some of the literature I've read around this, how people have inevitably always imagined consciousness through whatever technology has been available at the time. So once a book, then a library, or a telephone exchange, and then now the internet, of course, with the digital. So I think that often we think of memory as file retrieval. We're going to go and find a memory, access it, load up the file, bam. And he goes on to say, well, this is not really the right way to think about memory. It's too simple. A memory is not an album like that. It's not an album of unchanging photographs. It's a temporary constellation of activity in the brain. A necessarily approximate excitation of neural circuits that bind a set of sensory images and semantic data into the momentary sensation of a remembered whole. One sentence. It makes me think of Ezra Pound's famous definition of the poetic image. Something like an emotional and psychological complex at a particular moment in time was getting wrong. But he talks about the poetic image as something which condenses sort of excitation of memory and significance in words and time. These images and data are seldom the exclusive property of one particular memory. So in a sense, as he goes on to say, every memory is in a sense the memory of a memory. Indeed, even as my experience on that Valentine's morning was unfolding, my brain was relying on pre-existing categories: red, heart, Mr. Goodbar, grey sky was familiar from 1,000 Other Mornings. I already had millions of neurons devoted to a picture of my mother, her stinginess with postage, her romantic attachment to her children, her lingering anger toward my father, her weird lack of tact, and so on. You can see the kind of clinical, not really clinical, but quite fierce attitude he's taken towards his parents. And also just technically how he's managing to release the story of his family while at the same time talking about the science. It's quite skilled. I often, in my writing classes, I'm always telling students, well, writing's often about releasing information, but how fast are you going to release information so that you don't get a sense of, oh God, I've got information dropping on me. He's clearly read widely in the literature of dementia, but he's introducing it quite, he's sort of grinding it up in the story of his own family. So what the memory therefore consists of is a set of hardwired neuronal connections among the curtain regions of the brain, and predisposition for the entire constellation to light up chemically and electrically when any one part of the circuit is stimulated. So I don't know if any of you came to the Mark Solms lecture a while back. It was an extension lecture, and he was talking about things which I felt resonated with us, where he said neurons that fire together wire together. So I don't even know quite how to express it, but the memories sort of constitute themselves by the act of remembering. It's not a file that you retrieve. Every memory is in a sense an act of creation, and of recreation, and of transformation. Every memory in a sense embeds itself as you remember it again, but it also changes slightly. It's a very hard thing to wrap one's head around, as I said. I wanted to talk about Mr. Goodbars, because I didn't know what Mr. Goodbars was. And this is another thing one has to think about in writing, is a frame of reference. Are people going to know what you're talking about if you start talking about, well, Diane Keaton probably, I can get Diane Keaton, but Mr. Goodbar, no. So I asked one of the students in the lecture here in America, and I said, well, it's a chocolate bar, right? What kind of chocolate bar? And she said, well, it's kind of old-timey. It's quite interesting, chocolate bars have different identities, and nostalgia and memory often goes around sweets and chocolates. We then had a long discussion about what all the different chocolate bars meant. But this was, I typed Mr. Goodbar into the place we go to now, Google, the world memory. And there's a moment, particularly if you've got a useless connection like mine, where before the images come up, this happens. This is the internet going, It's on the tip of my tongue. And a friend of mine called Ben Stanwix has started doing this. He sort of types in still life with fruit, and then he captures this and makes tapestries out of it. Kids are doing. So that, okay, then it loaded. And then, so, yeah, that's just prior to that. And then, of course, you get Mr. Goodbar, but all other trash that's associated with, you know, and this is the thing with the internet, there's just so much information. And this also links to the next part of this page, which I think is very interesting. But wait, let me, while I'm still on Google, I'm interspersing the rather sardonic and fierce and quite depressing tone of this essay. Not entirely depressing, with lighter notes from Fanula Dowling's poetry collection, Notes from the Dementia Ward, which I really recommend to you. And this is one poem that I enjoyed from there. It's called Where Google Has Not Been. I have asked so much of the internet. Is it true that I once saw as a child an umbrella hoisted high in the mass? What are the traits of a zebra? Who or what is a senior wrangler? Ah, what a dusty answer gets the soul when hot for certainties in this our life. Who said that? It's where we go to now. Our memory's been outsourced to devices. And I have found such answers along its vast electric autobahns. Meredith, pugnacious, odd-toed, the opposite of a wooden spoon. A processional canopy was what you saw. Holy things must be covered. I grew sick of Google's cleverness, and I grew sly. And so I asked, where is Farah Fawcett Majors now? I don't know what that means. She doesn't actually see it, but the frame of reference is in.
She was one of Charlie's angels.
Okay.
Anal cancer.
Oh, God. Okay, yeah. All right. So she's asking about an actress. Why won't my mother die? Can we hasten death? And Google said, try to limit the number of difficult situations your loved one has to face. Distract her from hallucinations by engaging her in a pleasurable activity. Caring for someone with dementia can be very rewarding. On another page, Google offered a photographic view of a vulva. But I have 1,000 places inside where Google has never been. Strange poem, crazy poem. Google's, in a sense, we think the internet's got all answers, but what are the places of our own memory where it can never go amidst all the deluge of pornography and just trivia and everything that links to everything? And also here, the sort of well-meaning but rather deflating tone of the kind of self-help manual. Indispensable, but also, you know, again, that's why I turned to Franzen and this poem, because it's something a bit stronger medicine. Right, so back to this page, where he goes on to say, you know, and I think this is a nice moment of honesty here, because he says that, you know, actually the story I've told about my mother and the Valentine's Day, I've actually, this is like an anecdote that I rehash again and again. I've told the story to my brothers, I've offered it as an outrageous mother incident to friends of mine who enjoy that kind of thing. I don't know if you know that story, you get sick of your own stories, you know. If I tell the story again, I'm actually damaging my own memory of it. I don't even want to talk about it, because it's just going to make it sound. And he's getting that honesty at that second remove, which I think is good. I have even, shameful to report, told people I hardly know. Each succeeding recollection and retelling reinforces the constellation of images and knowledge that constitute the memory. So it starts to sort of solidify. At the cellular level, according to neuroscientists, I'm burning the memory a little deeper each time, strengthening the dendritic connections. And then he goes on to say that actually, though, one of the great adaptive virtues of our brains, and what makes our brains so much smarter than the internet, is that we actually forget almost everything that happens to us. Unlike a website full of broken links, which is the kind of bane of the internet, or it used to be. It used to be. I guess Google algorithms change everything, but you know, broken links, broken URLs, the clutter of unused links. The brain, because they're not being used, they fall away. They fall away. I think, as I understand it from what you're saying. And he talks about, you know, the memories that I do retain, I tend to revisit and thereby strengthen. They become literally, morphologically, electrochemically part of the architecture of my brain. Now, I thought I'd just segue here to, it's interesting to me how Borges has come up again and again as I've been thinking about these lectures. I think often because he's doing in his short stories thought experiments that are trying to probe what consciousness is, the outer limits of what we can think, and he often has to turn to these strange tales. Borges, in terms of non-fiction and fiction, an interesting figure because he started writing poems and short stories, wasn't successful, and then started writing book reviews of imaginary books, fake books, and putting them in the newspaper. And you see, all of them, you know, he's always writing about figures that seems very non-fictional, writing about encyclopedias or worlds or figures from the past, but they're all products of his own imagination. So it's fiction in drag, almost. It's fiction in disguise as non-fiction, which I love writing like that. He says, Funes the memorious, sometimes translated as Funes his memory, or Funes the elephant memory. It's about a man who can't forget anything at all. I remember him. I have no right to utter the sacred verb. Only one man on earth had that right, and he is dead. And then he goes on to talk about this man, who actually, because he can't forget everything, all he can do is lie in a darkened room. Because the world is so overpowering to him, he can't even think. He simply exists in the pure presence of a perfect memory, beyond photographic. Just everything that ever happened to him is there. Nothing is forgotten. And I'll just read this passage because it's just so amazing, right? We, he's talking about ordinary people, at one glance, can perceive 3 glasses on a table. Funes all the leaves and tendrils and fruit that make up a grapevine. He knew by heart the forms of the southern clouds at dawn on the 30th of April, 1882, and could compare them in his memory with the mottled streaks on a book in Spanish binding he had only seen once, and with the outlines of the foam raised by an oar in Rio Negro the night before the Quebracho uprising. These memories were not simple ones. Each visual image was linked to muscular sensations, thermal sensations, etc. He could reconstruct all his dreams, all his half-dreams. 2 or 3 times he had reconstructed a whole day. He never hesitated, but each reconstruction had required a whole day. It's like the thing yesterday about whole truth would require your whole life to tell it. He told me I alone have more memories than all mankind has probably had since the world has been the world. And again, my dreams are like you people's waking hours. And again, toward dawn, my memory, sir, is like a garbage heap. A circle drawn on a blackboard, a right triangle, a lozenge. All these are forms we can fully and intuitively grasp. Ireneo could do the same with the stormy mane of a pony, with a herd of cattle on a hill, with the changing fire and its innumerable ashes, with the many faces of the dead man throughout a long wake. I don't know how many stars he could see in the sky. Multi-dimensional writing this, and of course the sky, the stars being the memory of the light echo, as it's called, of things that no longer exist. Everything we see really is memory, in a larger sense, in the night sky, the light taking its time to reach us. So yeah, that's the opposite end of the scale, someone who can't forget anything. Let's get back to Franzen. So it's very self-reflexive, it's very conscious of itself as an essay, it's conscious of itself telling a story, not remembering. And at one point he says, at the end of the first section, he says, this was his disease. It was also, you could argue, his story. But you have to let me tell it. It's interesting again, the pronouns here. His, you, the personal you, who's you? There, it's quite interesting. Whenever there's a you in a piece of non-fiction, who's actually being addressed, you have to let me tell it. You'd never get an essay like this through a university ethics committee. No? I mean, what are the ethics of writing about someone who's got dementia and can't contest your version of it? It's problematic, deeply problematic. In the academy, problematic is often where you're supposed to stop, but if you're a writer out in the world, problematic is often where you start. And Fionnuala, when I saw a reading of her doing some of her poems from that collection, and someone asked that question and said, well, isn't this a bit, playing my mother like this? She said, no, I thought about that a lot, but my feeling was that if it's done with love, sufficient love and attention and care, then I'll do it. So, there's an open question there about what it even means to tell someone's story. You have to let me tell it. And so how does he tell it? And this is what we're trying to say. We often read non-fiction just as information, but this is a very carefully plotted essay. It's very literary, it's very patterned. It's in 7 sections. This is one thing the essay can do very interestingly, is work in sections. We sort with Leftwich's piece, a lot of sections break between them, almost like elapsed time, space. It's a very powerful device if used well, the break. What does it mean to divide a piece of writing you're doing into sections? Just to make each section a new kind of start. I often do an exercise in writing classes where someone has to start an essay 7 different times over. It's an interesting exercise. So the first part we've gone through. Then the second part he talks about how Alzheimer's is a disease of insidious onset. How it's so slow when it starts that you can often camouflage it through just ordinary aspects of forgetfulness. And certainly this was my experience with my mother. And like, as often happens with this condition, it opens up all the fault lines in the family. And he gives us a portrait of a less than happy marriage. And what happens to that marriage when faced with this? And his mother's letters to him saying how difficult his father is becoming, how he refuses her help when she's just trying to, but he's so private, he doesn't want to talk about it, he doesn't believe in therapy. He's a sort of man of the old school, very private, self-reliant, doesn't want the help which she wants to give. And then there's the third section where there's a noticeable decline, there's mounting anxiety and confusion as the disease begins to hit other brain centers, the amygdala and so on. And then a sort of meditation on medicine, what he calls his suspicion for the medicalization of human identity, and this metaphor which Schenk uses of the most powerful, so disturbing way to understand Alzheimer's is a reverse childhood. That, in a sense, it's a retrogenesis. The first things you learn are the last things you forget. It's sort of first in, last out. So that, he even makes a remark at some point that there's moments of civility and politeness which persist very late into the condition because we learn how to be social animals very early, and smile and so on. So then there's this sort of terrifying scene of his father coming home for Thanksgiving. It's supposed to be a nice evening, it turns into a kind of nightmare. Then he finds his father's letters that he hadn't known about from very late in the disease, and then finally the final chapter. So it's definitely sections. And just at this point I wanted to, just thinking more generally about the essay form, because I came across this introduction he'd written to, every year this comes out, Best American Essays, and every year there's a new writer, different writer introduces it, and sort of gives their take on why they selected the essays they did. And I found Franzen's, and yeah, I think it was interesting to me, he said that his main criterion was whether the author had taken a risk. And he said there's many kinds of essays, but I chose ones that took a risk. And he gives the different kinds of risk here, As Arthur Miller once said, the best work that anybody ever writes is on the verge of embarrassing him, always. The writer has to be like the firefighter whose job, while everyone else is fleeing the flames, is to run straight into them. Your material feels too hot, too shameful to even think about, therefore you must write about it. Hard. I think when we start writing, we write about things that are easy and we like to write about, and slowly, when people come to this, I'm sitting on 72 and I want to get an 85. What am I going to do? Like, well, I don't know, fall in love, go to another country, but no, so take a risk, your writing is, can you put more in stake? Can you have more skin in the game? And then he goes on, because he's a sort of big anti-social media person, which I also kind of like about him. He says that shame in digital media most frequently occurs as a transitive verb, i.e. you shame somebody. A transitive verb is a verb that takes an object, so you shame someone. As a noun, shame, a thing you might fear experiencing, it tends to remain carefully hidden. So he says that, there's a paradox in his view, that while social media is celebrated for its construction of personas through which they can safely experiment with different aspects of his personality, but he says most of these personas are self-flattering in one way or another, cooler or cockier or handsomer than the real person behind them, and the internet is structured to create communities of their intensely like-minded. So we've got a bit of a moral panic around the digital here. He says, although the virtual world may look from a distance like a free-for-all essayistic self-exposure, it actually functions more like a system for avoiding the potentially shameful self. So what I get from his piece is that maybe to write a compelling personal essay, and I'm thinking of the Leftwich again, you've got to make shame from a verb into a noun, and you've got to make risk from a noun into a verb. You've got to risk something. And put it out there in the world for an audience that might not be synthetic or might not be like-minded. So, little diversion. Let's just have another poem from Ta-Nehisi. So, some of this sort of more... You see, what I don't think Franzen gets in his essay, perhaps because of the kind of person his father was, obviously a very serious man, were the moments of real searing comedy and strangeness and absurdity that come from going through this experience with someone. Self-portrait from the dementia ward. After a few mouthfuls of supper, she lies back on the pillows, struggling against the bed sore to be comfortable. Words elude her. Everything is so... And she moves her elegant fingers in a way to suggest a Jackson Pollock painting. I think about prompting her, but I want to hear the substitute, the synonym that a shattered genius will provide. Even so, I am surprised. Modernistic, she says eventually, and closes her eyes, exhausted by the last stand, the self-portrait. And then on the facing page, there's this poem about her brother phoned her. My brother phoned to check if I was still alive. He'd heard it on the radio. I only realised I was at risk when my brother phoned to check if I was still alive. He'd heard it on the radio. A woman fitting my description apparently wept on the harbour wall before she died. So it wasn't you? Realising it was time. I too, as I replied, couldn't help sounding unconvinced, as if searching for a stronger proof. After verbally confirming my existence, I walked to the bay window and considered the breakwater, the beacon, the beckoning sea, and the woman who jumped in my place. So even though the tonality of the collection is sort of light, there's ways of expressing very deep emotion not in the most emotive language, and I think often that is a very effective way. I find that running through the collection. So we get to this section where he talks about how he was annoyed actually by the term Alzheimer's disease, and I must say I also relate to that. That something so radical, so immense, so life-altering, so final goes under this name of just someone who happened to discover neurofibrillary plaques in the brain of a patient. And he says, well, this is also quite funny because you see the older self relating to the younger self. He's hearing a lot about Alzheimer's disease in the news. This is way before it's happened to his father. To my mother's news, I said, well, it sounds like the same old Erica. That's not how Alzheimer's is supposed to work, is it? I spend a few minutes every month fretting about ordinary mental illness being trendily misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's. That's what he says to his mother back then. From my current vantage, where I spend a few minutes every month fretting about what a self-righteous 30-year-old I was, I can see my reluctance to apply the term Alzheimer's to my father as a way of protecting the specificity of Franzen from the generality of a nameable condition. he doesn't like the fact that suddenly his father has been placed in this category of the Alzheimer's patient. A father whose name, as he points out, is an anagram of Lear, King Lear, who goes through something similar in Shakespeare's tragedy. Conditions have symptoms. Symptoms point to the organic basis of everything we are. We become a symptom rather than a person. They point to the brain as meat. It doesn't want to acknowledge this. And where I want to recognize that, yes, the brain is meat, I seem to instead maintain a blind spot across which I then interpolate stories that emphasize the more soul-like aspects of myself. So, seeing my afflicted father as symptoms invite me to understand the healthy, Franzen and the healthy me in a symptomatic way. So, yeah, he's sort of wrestling with this, having to confront the medicalization of modern existence, which Atul Gawande has written about beautifully in Being Mortal. And he sort of takes on Schenk and says that, when Schenk writes this book, The Forgetting, he kind of articulates a sort of hopeful idea that even as your memory fails, patients often enter a kind of intensely inhabited present where they can be actually very, very happy and peaceful and experience things very vividly in certain phases of the condition, that there's even something delicious in oblivion. And he's a little bit skeptical of that sort of. He's always worried about whether he's giving things a sentimental reading. But he does take Schenk's point, and I think this is what I want to lift from here, that senility is not just an erasure of meaning, it's a source of meaning. It's a window onto the self and onto the soul. And I see I'm running out of time, so I'll speed up. But what he says, is that, as Schenk says, the sheer duration of the disease compels you to really ask some radical questions about what is the self, where does it reside, how long does it last, does it depart? In this Thanksgiving scene, they try to pretend that they're having a lovely family meal and take a picture, and he gives a very clinical reading of how nightmarish it actually was. And it also struck me that when one is entering this world of someone who has dementia, you inevitably become conscripted in a whole lot of fictions, because it often becomes impossible to make someone right or to correct their misapprehension if they believe their husband or their wife is still alive. Are you going to correct them every 5 minutes and say they're not, they died 20 years ago? And there's a very interesting article, I really highly recommend it, by Larissa McFarquhar, where she talks about how memory care units in the United States are doing a strategy where they create nostalgic small-town environments for patients with memory loss to try and ease the anxiety and the panic. For example, one of the things people suffering from this often ask all the time is, when am I going home? How can I go home? So what they have a bus stop, and they take people and they say, well, yes, you can go, you just wait at the bus stop. And then they leave, and then they'll probably forget about it in a few minutes. So the article is interesting because the writer, Larissa McFarquhar, is a wonderful writer. She's quite skeptical about this. She says, well, yeah, I can understand this sort of compassionate lying or comforting fiction that people create around sufferers, but what does it mean if you continue lying to people? What does it do to the carers? What does it do to the staff if they're continually entering into this make-believe or this simulation? So it raises some really interesting questions about what fiction and fictionality is, and there's a video there as well. Just getting to the last part. So, what Schenk says is one of the most important sources of meaning that Alzheimer's allows us to see, one of the biggest windows onto meaning, is the way it slows down the process of dying. It's a prism that refracts death into a spectrum of its otherwise tightly conjoined parts: death of autonomy, death of memory, death of self-consciousness, death of personality, death of body. And he subscribes to the most common trope of Alzheimer's, that its particular sadness and horror stem from the sufferer's loss of his or herself long before the body dies. You'll often hear people say that, oh, they really died years ago. You know, he says, well, it seems right for me, but he starts trying to extend the sense of self and says, well, you know, the more I looked, I can't stop looking for meaning in the 2 years that followed his loss of his supposed self, and I can't stop finding it. And this was, you know, this again sort of resonated with the poem. This is the first poem in the collection from Vanilla. When she wanders from room to room looking for someone who isn't there, when she asks where we keep the spoons, when she can't chew and spits out her food, when her last dim light flickers with falling ash and she exclaims, what a dismal end to a brilliant day. When she calls her regular lassiter an astronaut, when she can't hear words but fears sounds, when she says, don't go, I can't bear it when you go, or just run me off the cliff, or wants to know how many disparate ends it, then I think how, at 85, my mother's mind is a castle in ruin. Time has raised her drawbridge, lopped her bastions, her balustrades crumbled, and she leans. You may still walk these ramparts in awe. Sometimes when she speaks, the ghostly ensign flies. Town cannot hide what once stood here or its glory. Do not think we are good or merely tourists. That which detains us was once our fortress. She often has this metaphor of the ruin in the poetry collection. Of course, ruins are objects of great contemplation for many romantic poets. The sort of power of the ruin, implying a whole that once existed but no longer does. The poetics of the ruin, I suppose. It's like, I don't know, it's quite a radical metaphor. But this idea that at times the ghostly ensign flies, that there'll still be flickers of personhood that you recognize in certain terms of phrase, angle of a head, or whatever it might be. Two shorter ones. Oh my God, I'm so pleased to see you, she says from her nest of blankets. I've been here to ask, how's your father? How was Paddy? He died, I say, remembering 1974. Good heavens, now you tell me how lucky he is. You could join him, I suggest. I didn't like him that. He's not a very formidable woman. You know, his mother. Birthday in a dementia ward. We were discussing her 86th birthday. She pulls herself up from her cushions. I wonder, I would really like my mother to come. Could you arrange that? Her mother was born in 1888, even if she were Japanese. I'll see if I can arrange, trust me. So, the therapeutic fibbing, as they call it in that article. Just going with the crazed fiction that sort of you get placed in places where Google can undertake you. So, okay, I'll wind it up, but this is also a great article which reviews the literature of Alzheimer's, and it talks about, is it possible to write about the disease in all its radical, in all its sort of horror and radical and comedy and the radical questions it poses without reducing it to some kind of sentimental trope that the true self still exists, because actually the self has been profoundly changed, or the self as we normally understand it. And he says that even in The Corrections, which is Franzen's novel, you know, there's a moment when Alfred, the father figure, he's quite a nasty character, domineering man, and late, deep into his dementia, in the last pages of The Corrections, he has this single word, I, dash. Franzen leaps inside Alfred's mind and articulates the awareness that the disease is happening. I have made mistakes. As moved as I am by this moment, it seems impossible that Alfred could muster such a complex, expansive idea. So he's even saying, he seems to say that even Franzen can't resist jumping into that blank and giving it a kind of interpretation and a meaning that it can't really hold. Whereas I think his essay, as it talks about his father's final dying, is different. He looks to a self that survives in his body, in his will, even if his conscious self has long vanished. And I think I will just leave it with that. Because it's the pronoun again, but it's also, in a sense, the final limit zone between non-fiction and fiction. Within fiction, you can climb into that dash and begin to interpolate the black. But in non-fictional forms, generally you can't ever know what's actually going on in someone else's consciousness, and far more so when that person is in the final stages of dementia. So I'll leave there, and yeah, I've got questions. That all makes sense. Maybe we can watch this video.
Suppose there's a woman who believes her husband is still alive, even though he died 10 years ago. If you're taking care of her, whether you're a nurse or whether you're her daughter, let's say, you have a dilemma. Do you tell her he's dead and possibly cause her to be bereaved all over again, knowing, moreover, that she will likely ask you the same question tomorrow or even in an hour from now and become bereaved all over again? Or do you simply say, oh, he's not here, he's at the office? There are a number of nursing homes for people with dementia in various countries of the world that are experimenting with getting away from the traditional look, which is basically that of a hospital, putting in place instead what looks like a street or a neighborhood in a town. And the idea is to give people who live there a sense that they are somewhere normal, that they are somewhere familiar. They're not rotting in a hospital, they're just in another village street. The place I spent the most time was a place called The Lantern, which is in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, just east of Cleveland. Their memory care unit is centered around an open area in the middle, like a traditional American town square. The carpet is designed to look like grass. There are clapboard facades of houses that project into the room with porches. In a traditional nursing home, the lights are on all the time, 24/7. In Chagrin Falls, they, at a certain point in the evening, turn the ceiling lights off, and they turn the porch lights on and the street lights on, and it looks like a town street at night. There's been an enormous amount of thought put into curating the life of a person with dementia so that they can get as much out of it as they possibly can, depending on what they're still able to enjoy and able to do. Eleanor Margolis was the person I spent most time with when I was in Chagrin Falls. She has problems with her memory, but she's very much still herself. When I was there,